we apologize for those of you who are having to stand for the program. I just wanted to thank you all for coming out this evening. I wanted to congratulate Christine on her book. Obviously, there's a great deal of interest in this subject. So this is very exciting for Christine and for Otis Library and for all those who enjoy the history of the Norwich State Hospital. I'll just give you a little bit of background. Christine Rockledge began extensively researching Norwich State Hospital in 2009 and allied with the Preston Historical Society in 2011. She has spoken publicly, raising awareness on the importance of Norwich State Hospital's local contribution to mental health and Connecticut history and how it applies today. Many of the images in the book came from former hospital staff and their families and have never been seen before by the public. Christine brought many copies of the books with her this evening. She's going to speak for about a half an hour, then she'll do Q&A, and then there'll be time to purchase copies of the book. $26 including tax, that's tax included, and it's cash or check. So if you are not able to get a copy this evening, if you're not able to stick around, Christine is going to be doing talks probably all over this area. So just, you can follow her on Facebook, correct? Yes. Yes, you can follow her on Facebook, and I'm sure that you'll be seeing her name in the news quite a bit in this area. So without further ado, Christine Rockledge.
Thank you very much, Julie. And first of all, thank everybody here for coming tonight. I am overwhelmed and excited to be here. The positive response to the book since its release really has been overwhelming and has touched me very deeply. I'm somewhat at a loss for words. I don't know what to say, and I'm just so happy that everybody is receiving it so well and has been enjoying it. First thing I want to ask before we get started tonight is, how many Norwich Hospital alumni do we have in the audience? I want to personally thank each and every one of you for your tireless and selfless love and care and dedication and all the hard work that you and generations of families gave to, thank you Sarah, gave to the mentally ill of Connecticut. Exactly. This book wouldn't exist without you, and quite frankly, I wouldn't have had such a beautiful subject matter to write about if it wasn't for you. So again, thank you. I first began researching the hospital nearly a decade ago after working with a man whose uncle was a patient at Norwich Hospital. He would tell me a lot of positive stories and detailed stories about his uncle and how if it wasn't for Norwich Hospital, his uncle never would have been able to live the kind of normal life in society with his illness that he strives so hard to do. This man's name was Larry, that was my coworker, and Larry just painted such a beautiful, positive image of Norwich Hospital, even when he described what it was like to not be able to visit his uncle while he was a patient in the Salmon building, and Larry and his brother had to wait outside, sitting on the curb, playing in the dirt and in the grass while patients yelled out the window, "Hey man, you got a cigarette?" And he told me what he knew of the negativities of Salmon, but for some reason, for me, it just never detracted from the intrigue, from the beauty, and from the positivity that I could find and that I felt at Norwich Hospital. In around 2007, I was given permission by the state of Connecticut to photograph some of the interior buildings, and that trip, that's what started this whole thing. they did not give me a good enough opportunity to see as much as I wanted to and as I should. And all I'm going to say is after that trip and nearly a decade of photographing the place and recovering artifacts and being donated artifacts by former Norwich Hospital employees, it's snowballed into a very big part of my life, and I'm very proud to say that. During that first visit and subsequent visits to Norwich Hospital, my first impression was that the grounds were so peaceful and airy, wide open and beautiful. Even in its unused state, it still retained that peace and that beauty, and only there did I see things like butterflies just flying around, being themselves, wildlife that you don't see in the cities and in neighborhoods. And as I would walk the property and look inside the buildings, I could see why people wanted to be there to get better. And I know a lot of people would be like, well, how could you want to be at Norwich Hospital? How could you want to be in an insane asylum to get better? Yesterday I spoke with a woman named Teresa. She's, I believe, 87 years old, God bless her heart. She volunteered at Norwich Hospital for 17 years. And she told me that she often worked with a lady who had a very demanding household, a lot of children, a lot of chaos, verbal abuse and other negative things going on. And as summer would come, she would purposely become intoxicated to get herself committed to Norwich Hospital because she said it was her summer vacation. And it made me laugh when she told me this, but after being on the grounds and seeing it, I can understand why. Because it is the perfect place for anybody with any kind of mental illness or stress or trauma to go and get the help that they need, and just to be able to relax and lose yourself. And I did. I lost myself in the buildings and on the grounds during my decade of documenting it. As I was setting up, there was a gentleman who came up to me when this slide came up about a patient who stole a fire truck from Norwich State Hospital. I found this article very early on in my research of the hospital when I began delving through newspaper articles and just really tearing it apart and really uncovering everything. And I couldn't help it, but I laughed when I read the end where he said, "Gee whiz, see my new fire engine, and it belongs to the state of Connecticut." Excuse me, and all I could think of was a very happy man riding through the town, mowing down hens, as the article said, but that part is not in the slide, and just so gleefully chanting that as he drives through his neighborhood. It made me laugh, and the more that I researched about Norwich Hospital, and not just finding the funny stories or the things that made me laugh, the more that I researched about it and found all the positivities, I really had to dig to find the negativities. It was not easy. And that was another thing when I began this project that I instantly wanted to dispel. I wanted to put a stop to the ghost stories and the fictional tales of people being dragged into the basement of Salmon and chained up to the wall and beaten by the staff. I was in that basement. I spent hours in that basement. I never found one iota of evidence that anybody was ever harmed or tortured down there. No chains on the walls, no hooks for chains to be fixed up to, nothing crazy. The first floor of the Salmon building in the 50s had been renovated and given over to forensic research. The second floor had been retrofitted with iron bars to house the state of Connecticut's criminally insane population, which was something Norwich State Hospital did not want to have. The administrators felt that housing this class of patient on Norwich State Hospital grounds was not therapeutic for them. They needed to be in their own separate treatment facility that would not impact other patients of other classes and illnesses, and would be best off by themselves. It wasn't until the 1970s when the Whiting Forensic Treatment Center at Connecticut Valley Hospital in Middletown was opened, and then Salmon was subsequently closed. Throughout the beginning of Norwich State Hospital, the General Assembly consistently denied hospital administrators monies to erect additional ward buildings as the so-called insane population grew. The opposition from the General Assembly did not seem to cease until the 1950s. And during this first 50 years of repeated opposition and not wanting to appropriate the funds that the hospital needed to grow and to treat its patients, that's where I found the darkness in Norwich Hospital's history. And a big part of that darkness came from the lack of funding. Without adequate funding, the staffing could not do their jobs. There was nothing for patients, not to the levels that they needed. If patients don't have clothing, don't have adequate food, don't have sheets on their beds, you cannot expect them to get better, so to speak. During that time too, as I was digging around and finding some of the more darker things on my quest to dispel the rumors and a lot of the local lore that just bothered me, I kind of went off on a tangent and just learning about mental health history as a whole throughout our country, covering the eras of sterilizations, shock treatment therapies such as metrazole and insulin, electroconvulsive therapies, and everybody's favorite, lobotomy. And found out that no, that was not just specific to Norwich State Hospital, and it was not just specific to the state of Connecticut. It was worldwide, and in our country alone, it was a medical point in time that our society and medicine itself had to go through as kind of a trial and error. They say that the road to hell is paved with good intentions, and that's how I felt about that point in time in Norwich Hospital's history. Doctors did want to help. They wanted the wards to not be overcrowded. They didn't want patients sleeping up in attics that were just not meant for people to be up there. They wanted to get the people home, back to their families, back being a productive citizen of society. So the further that I researched and read about it, the more I was able to put myself mentally back into that time period to see, yes, I understand why Dr. Freeman decided that this was going to be marketed as a surgical procedure that would get patients home. And in reading about him himself, I also found that he came from a prominent medical family, medical history family, and he wanted to make a name for himself too, but that's going off onto another thing right there. But yeah, I learned that no, these treatments were not so horrid and barbaric and cruel. It was just medicine trying to find its way. And as it progressed into the 50s, when the psychotropic drugs began to come out, they started to learn that, okay, these things are not working. Treatments such as metrazole are so rash and so violent, patients are breaking bones. We're having additional labor-intensive things to worry about. Insulin shock, far too risky. Norwich Hospital abandoned that and the metrazole in the 1940s and was not a large proponent of the Connecticut Cooperative Lobotomy Study. Also in my research, and this was actually found very early on in my documenting of the hospital itself, on the second or third floor, I'm sorry, it was so long ago I don't remember which floor, but this slip of paper was a little slip, most likely just for jotting down notes or for writing down the date that a book was due. Back at Otis Library, on the other side of this paper said Otis Library, Norwich, Connecticut. And I picked it up and I read it, and I'm like, okay, well, evidently this is from a patient that was here. I knew nothing. I just put it in my bag and continued on about my day. And as I kept diving deeper and deeper, I found out that this piece of paper belonged to Peter Mayock, also known as Prophet Peter, who was the inspiration for the fictional novel I Know This Much Is True by Wally Lamb. If anybody's not familiar with Peter Mayock, he was committed multiple times to Norwich State Hospital. I believe the first commitment was 1914 or 1917. It's in the book. My memory of dates sometimes is hazy. And I don't know the date of his famous obeying of that biblical junction, literally, but that and much more about Norwich Hospital was inspiration for Wally Lamb's novel. If you have not read this novel, pick it up, read it. It's a beast of a book. It's long. It's about 800 some odd pages, but it's beautiful and it's amazing. And it's a great nod to Norwich Hospital. And I recently read too that this is going to be made into, I think it's a 6-part HBO TV series. So I'm very excited to see that myself. This is a photograph from the Hartford Times from approximately 1954. Due to the image quality, this picture did not make it into the book, and I was hoping that it could because I wanted to illustrate the overcrowding and the stress that it put on staff members to perform at their best to try to help their patients. A lot of these commitments came from, as that gentleman that found me earlier said about the patient that stole the fire engine. There was nothing wrong with him mentally. He was gay. And it's not uncommon. As I learned a lot about the reasons for commitments back then, people were either committed simply for being homosexual, or people just threw their spouses in there because they didn't want to deal with it. Postpartum depression, misunderstood by husbands, put your wife in the state hospital. Elderly people that family did not want to take the burden on of, put them in the state hospital. And
promiscuity.
That's another one. Excuse me. All these different things. None of these warranted anybody being in the state hospital. And so that's how wards like this became so grossly overcrowded that everybody is sitting shoulder to shoulder. Nobody can move. How do they get into their beds at night to go to sleep? You are packed in worse than sardines. This picture also is from the Hartford Times in 1954. And once I felt satisfied in digging up Norwich Hospital's darker side, because right from the beginning I was always just very engulfed with the positivity, and I knew that everything has to balance itself out. You have good and you have bad. As the 50s wore on, I found positivity. I found that from 1921 all the way until we're saying probably into the 60s, maybe the 70s, that even though the darkness was going on and bad things were happening, there were staff members such as Dr. William Bryan that when he took over superintendency of Norwich State Hospital, he wanted to make a big change for the better. And he really set Norwich Hospital on a road of becoming one of the best hospitals in the country. Occupational therapy, which that department was established in 1921 by Harry Cromer, was a huge, great thing at Norwich Hospital and throughout all the state hospitals in the country. Instead of keeping patients sedentary and sitting around staring at the walls with nothing to do, he kept them busy. He got patients outside. There's photos in the book of hospital carnivals that he held every year, sponsored by the local Elks Club, to get people outside. It didn't matter if you could participate or not. Even if all you could do was sit outside in a chair and enjoy the festivities from the sidelines, you were out there. You were not sitting with an idle mind, becoming the devil's tool. You were doing something. You were progressing forward. And that's what Norwich Hospital was forward progressing. In the 1950s, there was something called Operation Friendship. Madeline Carroll, all the way on the far right, is a former film star. For the life of me right now, her most famous role is escaping me, but I know that she did do stand-up and was touring with Bob Hope during the war to cheer people up. She came to Norwich Hospital in the late 50s, early 60s to speak of her own mental breakdown and to really speak one-on-one with the patients to show them that this can happen to anybody, to really spur somebody on, to give a positivity to them and to give hope. I forget the name of the man in the middle, and that is Dr. Ronald Kettle, all the way on the left. Vivian Vance from I Love Lucy is pictured in the book with former hospital assistant superintendent, Warren Burns. She was also part of Operation Friendship and spoke of her mental breakdown as well, and really sat down and spoke one-on-one with patients in the hospital while she was touring it. And it was a beautiful thing. It was fantastic, and it was very uplifting for a lot of people. I also found too, as I was walking through the buildings and finding that, I'm sure you've heard in the media and whatnot that Norwich Hospital looked like people just upped and left in the middle of a shift. I found a pair of eyeglasses sitting on top of a book in the powerhouse, like someone just took them off, placed them down, walked away like they were going to get a cup of coffee or something, and just never came back. As I saw these things and looked around and saw everything that Norwich Hospital had to offer, such as numerous bowling alleys, an indoor basketball court, a roller skating rink, a dance floor. I'm thinking to myself, and this is, as I'm trying to figure the hospital out, I'm like, there is no way with the state putting this kind of money and effort into buildings for this kind of treatment for patients that this is not a torture chamber. No, it's not. This is the Grand Theater. I don't know how many here have seen pictures of it, but this is the Norwich State Hospital Freudian Follies from 1965. And that was put on for the benefits of staff and patients to raise morale. Girls, please stop. That was put on inside this grand auditorium. There's no way the state of Connecticut appropriated money to build this kind of theater for a torture chamber. And I think it's sad that this building was just so dilapidated and so deteriorated that something this breathtaking and beautiful could not be saved. But thankfully, there are pictures to at least save the memory. So as I explored the buildings and saw things like this, I came away from Norwich Hospital feeling happy and positive and thinking to myself, this was established as a curative institution. And in my research of 10 years, I found out I was right. Steve DiPolito, who's in the audience with us tonight, on the 10th anniversary of the hospital's closing, produced a video documentary called Brewster's Neck, Memories of Norwich State Hospital, copies of which you can obtain here in Otis Library, to try to show people after the hospital closed, what it was like to work at Norwich Hospital and what it looked like inside the hospital, to also not only commemorate the memory of this great institution, but to also dispel the local lore that really bothers a lot of people. But I can't speak for him entirely, so I'm going to ask him to come up here and say a few words. Ladies and gentlemen, Steve Catholico.
Oh my God. Oh, I've never been in front of just like to say about 15 years ago, I was starting a little hobby up at Comcast Public Access where I just ran cameras for shows and things like that. And being around the studio, I want to make a movie someday. I want to make a movie. And this was, 2003, and I started thinking, well, what would be a good subject? And thinking that the hospital anniversary would come up in, the 10-year anniversary would come up in 2 years. I said, yeah, I'll teach myself how to make a video, and Norwich Hospital would be my topic. And the reason I chose that is for a lot of same reasons Christine wrote this book. My mom, dad, stepmom, brother, hey guys, the hospital was our life, and growing up, we were taught something that most people weren't taught. That the patients, they were people, just like you and I, and it was stressed that they weren't crazy or nuts or any of those bad words. We were taught this as kids. They were patients, and so I made this film. It was good. It was, in some respects, it was not so good technically. I had a lot to learn. I'm self-taught in a lot of things, and like my brother can tell you, I'm a self-taught golfer, and you can only go so far with that. And made a lot of technical mistakes, but a lot of it was really good. And I think I captured the spirit of caring, at the same time acknowledging, things did happen. But then I went on to, after I did this a few years later, a man named Dave Williams. Dave Williams was security at Norwich State Hospital. And the last few days, the title of the second film was Last Day at Norwich State Hospital. It was really actually a collection of VHS tapes that Dave shot during the last week the hospital was open. So I did that because Dave went through all this trouble and filled up 3 VHS tapes. So I edited it and that particular video I really loved because it really, if you want to see the hospital inside and out, the tunnels, going through Lodge building, the kettle, an aerial shot, a plane used to land in back of Norwich Hospital, one of those, what are they, pontoon planes, is that what they call them, that land on the water? Yeah. And Dave took a ride with him and did some wonderful filming. But I did those things, and then I didn't have anywhere to go with it. I was still working in the field. I was very close to the subject, which kind of hinders artistic freedoms and stuff. But looking back, I think I planted some seeds, and it's come to fruition here. That's pretty much all I have to say. I could go on and on and on, but I'll take away from Christine's time. But
this book would not exist if it wasn't for this man. As I was writing it, and like it says in the acknowledgments of the book, I reached kind of a stalemate in the writing process, and I contacted Steve and asked him one last time, because I know he wanted to put it behind him and kind of move on, but I asked him, please come back to Norwich Hospital one more time to help me finish this. And I am just so glad that you did. Thank you.
Can I sit down now?
Yes.
It was one of the proudest days of my life.
I'm
because,
glad.
the message of caring had to get out. Like you, I really fed up with the.
Yeah, and I understood
stuff.
completely when you said that you were too close to the subject to accurately get across
Right.
that emotion. And today, right here, right now, I feel like both of us can say, it's out there, it's been done.
And this book this is not only Norwich Hospital, but pretty much the history of mental health in
Yes.
the United States in the 20th century. Everybody had state hospitals.
Yep.
Some were better than others, but this one was one of the best, and that's a fact.
Yes.
It was nationally, worldwide known.
And I mean, locally and statewide, we should be proud that we have Norwich Hospital on our soil. Yes, we should. Okay, thank you. This is how I'm hoping that everybody will remember Norwich Hospital. Long after the property is redeveloped and new buildings are standing on it, I would like everybody to remember physically how beautiful the buildings were, how proud they stood, how beautiful the grounds looked in the snow at sunrise, sunset, even on a rainy day, and the generations upon generations of people who worked here and dedicated themselves and their lives and never ever saw their work at Norwich Hospital as a job, but they saw it as an extension of who they were, and they saw it as who they were. And it's because of all these people that gave so much of themselves and their lives. That's how I hope that everybody in this room tonight can look at Norwich Hospital and remember Norwich Hospital, not as a loony bin or a crazy institution, but as a beautiful, proud hospital that we had here in Connecticut to help heal our sick patients. Thank you very much. I'd like to open the floor now for any questions that anybody has.
I have a question. I just want to inform you, my daughter in Colorado just texted me, says, I see you. This is being live streamed on Facebook.
Right there.
Right there. And,
hi everybody that's watching. I'm sorry I didn't say hi in the beginning.
And so it's working fine.
Great. Okay, go right ahead,
Just a
Jack.
comment, Christine.
Sure.
When I worked in public safety, you talked about how beautiful the grounds were. I had a couple pull over to the side of the road one day, and I stopped to ask them if they needed directions or anything. And they were looking at a map, and they said, well, we just wanted to know what college this was. It was like...
Imagine if it could just be reused as a college, because, you know, when I first saw it driving down Route 12, I'm like, wow, this place is huge.
Christine?
Go ahead.
We were just going to start setting up the books out in the hallway.
That's fine.
Ready for the signing, so I just want to let you know.
Yep, go. If you need me to move my camera, I'll take care of it.
We'll be doing the signing out this doorway, and then if anyone just needs to
Okay.
find it next time.
Okay, actually, I'm gonna.
Thank you.
These 4 books?
These 4 boxes, yes. Hello to everybody watching at home. Humor is always good. Yes. Okay, go ahead, sir.
First of all, my wife thinks I'm at church, and now she sees me on
Sorry we ruined it for you.
happy about that. When Norwich Hospital was closing, in the basement we found a large green leatherette ledger. And on the front of it, it said, State Farm for Inebriates. This is not Gallup, not Badesky, this is not Detox. This was a farm that no one had heard of. Some people think that it was located in one book we saw, 3 miles to the east of Norwich Hospital. So somewhere out in Preston, there was a place where you would get probated to, and where at least 6 months of working on the farm, being sober, you were starting to make some progress towards sobriety and getting your life back together. But that was sent to the state archives. And hopefully that will lead to other questions, because that is a untold story.
That when I was researching that was like a whole story in itself of how that came to be. And it came to be as the superintendent at the time, Dr. Pollack, did not think that those under the influence of drugs and alcohol belonged in a psychiatric institution. He wanted them in their own separate institution. So he first established it in the old Gallup Farm buildings that were roughly 2 to 3 miles away from the main hospital campus. And as time progressed, he and his superintendent successors saw the inebriate farm, as they called it, to be a failure because there was not much supervision of the patients on that farm. They were operating stills and woods and, sneaking alcohol in, and there was a lot of bootlegging going on and other things like that. So it was eventually closed. But prior to it being closed, they did move it out of the old Gallup farm and dormitories that they had renovated to allow for extra patients, and they moved it into what used to be the old tuberculosis hospital that was for tubercular patients at Norwich Hospital. And that, I believe, was located maybe a mile or so away from the hospital before that was closed.
Thank you for that.
And thank you for letting me know that was brought to the state archives. Yes, go ahead.
No, I have a story to tell. And in 1956, I became a patient at the Norwich Hospital. And at that time, I had been a student at Yale Law School. And interestingly, for me at least, last week, I celebrated with my wife 60 years as an alumni of Yale Law School. I tell this story because I feel that many individuals who have suffered from mental illness might be encouraged to know that there can be a rainbow. That the rainbow always has some rain, and I'm not trying to say that life can be difficult. But when you have someone that you love, or loves you, you can overcome many of those problems. Let me tell you, and I think that you've done a wonderful thing by bringing the hospital back into Norwich, where over 2,600 or 3,000 people were employed at the Norwich Hospital, which was a major employer in the area. Now, I came here because to the Norwich Hospital because I had suffered from a mania. I was a manic depressive. I didn't want to come, and I was taken by police officers and brought to the Norwich Hospital. Well, at that time I was a lawyer to be, and I was able to prepare writs of habeas corpus, and a pitch, and wrote letters, and what have you. And many of my fellow lawyers said, Marty, don't do it, it will only hurt you in the future. Well, I stopped writing the letters, but I had a grand tour of the Norwich Hospital. They didn't know what to do with me. And I ended up in White Building, Salmon Building, and all the buildings that existed at the Norwich Hospital. There are a few incidents, I'm not going to belabor, but some of the incidents of caring and loving. There was a building where individuals were at the real extreme. And there was one individual who would lie on the floor all day long. And that individual would smack out to those who might bother him. Well, I had a mother who used to load up the bag with candy and cigarettes and ice cream. And one day I walked to this individual and I started to say a few things to him. And I gave him some cigarettes. Well, he had nothing. But a day later, he came up to me with a ball of cigarette paraphernalia, or the metal that goes into a cigarette, and he handed that to me. And that made an impression upon me that has existed for a long time as to giving and what can happen. Now let me just briefly tell you that I was responsible for bringing the mental health organization into Norwich with Donald Farrington, Stanley Israelite, Peg Wilson, and others. And there were many other activities that I did in order to try to help individuals to get on their feet. Now, the law practice that I had, let me tell you, was dealt with, or was involving helping people. And I was one who had the honor of being asked to even help other lawyers and their families to overcome the problems that they had had. Now, just another sideline. In the day that I was there, young children were put in with adults. Now that problem, that situation, does not exist anymore. The patients, the elderly patients who were put there, as you mentioned, so many families didn't know what to do with the geriatrics or families that were causing them difficulty. And what happened is the older people were strapped to a chair, and they were in this room that had some light, and they spent the day in that chair, you know, unkempt, being taken by those people who worked there as best as they could. Now, the White Building, which was the worst.
Yes.
And the White Building, I remember, and they put me there too. The White Building had a room where the patients walked around naked. They couldn't keep them in clothing. The patients were there and with their noise. And I walked into that room and I started to sing. And sure enough, they stopped their noise and they listened. Now we know today that music can help people who are depressed or having problems. Of course, the food was there, and the miasma and the odors, you know, was the worst kind of a situation that you could imagine. Just briefly, I'll tell you, Warren Byrne was the one who was the head of the hospital in those days. And Kettle, you should know, I believe his daughter is married to a local individual who's dedicated his life to helping people who are not well off and assisting them. As a sideline, and there's so much more, and I'm going to save that for my book. As a sideline, when I opened my practice, I was discharged after 6 months. They didn't know what the hell to do with me, but they finally got me out, and I was able to finish law school and pass the bar within a month and started practicing law. And who were my patients? Dr. Byrne, Dr. Santioli, Dr. with a B. Any number of them became my clients. And as we all know, the stigma of being in a mental institution was something that I was sensitive to, I kid you not. And my wife knew, I took her to introduce her to what I was and who I am and the difficulty that she might have. So my life became a dedication to trying to help people. I feel that I have, and I can be very proud of what has happened to me, and that I have tried to help others overcome the stigma of having been in a mental institution and having an emotional problem. Just as another side, I tried many cases. I was a trial lawyer, and I would appear in a voir dire asking people to be my jurors. Now, a lot of them were members of the staff of the Norwich Hospital. Never once did anyone ever raise the question. And I was able to keep moving. Not without difficulty, but only because of the love and caring of psychiatrists, the health of medicine, your family, and what have you. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, we have enough time to take a couple more. Anybody else have a question or comment? Go right ahead.
I just wanted to know, when was the hospital opened and when was it closed?
Opened October 10th, 1904, closed October 10th, 1996. 92 years. Does anybody else have a question or comment? Go ahead, please.
When I first started working at Norwich Hospital, would have been in like 1970, there was a building, the medical surgical building called
Lipid.
And they actually did major surgery.
Yep.
We would take patients who had had a heart attack or a stroke or burn patients and take care of them. And then when they were stable, they'd go back to the psych unit. And at that time, we had young doctors like Dr. Coletti and Dr. Tramontosi and Dr. Edgar, who would come to the hospital with their services. And it was wonderful how they treated the patients.
I liked when I learned about lipid that the doctors at Norwich Hospital, especially in that building, wanted patients to receive a full physical examination and take care of any physical ailments first before going on to decide whether or not the patient did have any kind of mental illness, because a lot of things were all physical problems causing people to behave in ways that you would not think are, how it happens. All right, I want to thank every... Oh,
As a
go.
nurse, we would take patients outside with IVs hanging.
I can imagine.
We'd bring them out, wheel them out in their beds.
Okay, you're the last one.
I had 3 aunts, and my sister worked at the state hospital. When I was a young fellow, I played Little League and Babe Ruth, baseball, Gales Ferry and Ledger. The Babe Ruth League used the ball field at the state hospital. And I remember if you hit a foul ball and one of the patients had the ball, you waited a while to get the ball. We had a good time over there, never a problem. Did I make a comment about the man with a fire engine? That was my great uncle.
Okay, very quickly.
Just a quick word, any of you folks who feel like you have a book in you about the state hospital or anything else, come to Otis Library. I'm Kathy Wheelan, I'm the genealogy and local history librarian. We don't have information about everything, but we're really good at trying to help you find places where you can dig up the information that you need. Okay? Thank you. Because if we don't have the information,
All right. I want to thank everybody so much for coming tonight. It was wonderful to have such a great turnout. Thank you, everybody. Thank you. We got live people watching still.
Hey!
Rock!
Thanks for coming.
Say hi.
She wants to know.
Excuse my voice.
She looks under the
Let me give you my email address and you can give it to her because I'm very private on Facebook.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
Okay. She sent me the book. And the day that your article came out on the day. So
I would love to. Okay, I'm going to turn you off. Thank you everybody for watching. Buy the book. Buy it. You will love it. It's awesome. And I'm not saying that just because I wrote it. It is. People will tell you themselves. Oh God, I gotta figure out how to save this. I will do a pan of the room.